So hey everyone, welcome back to one more video of the project. So in this video, what we are going to do is we are going to modify our code a little bit, our backend code that is sitting in our local development machine. We are going to modify it a little bit in order for it to connect to our database, in order to retrieve all of the values from the database. Okay. So the way that we would possibly do that is we are going to go ahead and connect to our local development machine, SSH into that machine, modify our code that is sitting in our source main resources application.properties directory, add the database endpoint as well as the password, and then we are going to generate another jar and directly run the jar from the EC2 instance in order to see whether it's able to connect to the database or not. Okay, so let's try to do that. If you have caught up from the previous session, in the previous section, what we did was we went ahead and created our database in RDS, and we created the schema, which was nothing but a database called as student, and we also created a table called as student, and we inserted 3 values into it. Okay, so let's get started with today's video. And today, like I mentioned, we are going to log into our development machine. So let's go to EC2 and let's take a look at the development machine, whether it's still running. So we have one local dev machine that is running. So within this dev machine is where I have my source code, which I cloned from the Git repository in the first class. But before going ahead and SSHing into this machine, we need to do one small security group modification so that our database takes in all of the incoming traffic from this machine. So therefore, what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and get the database's security group, which is nothing but the default security group, if I'm not mistaken. And we are going to add the security group of our EC2 instance as one of the inbound rules so that our database and our EC2 instance has connectivity, which means our local development machine and our database has connectivity. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's go to security groups. Should be on the left side in the EC2 console. Let's grab the default security group. So let's take the default security group. So this default security group right now is associated with the database because it has port 3306. We are going to add one more rule over here. I'm going to add one more MySQL rule. And this time I'm going to mention that it's going to come from my local dev machine, so that all of my traffic that I check from my local dev machine, that is I run my application locally within my local dev machine, it should be able to connect to my database. Okay, so this is the first step that we are going to do in order to give the network related configuration. The next thing that we are going to do is go and log into our development machine. So let's grab the public IP of this machine, go to my terminal, type SSH EC2 -user at public IP -i, the key pair file name, which is akshayzi.pem. So if you're not able to connect, you should always go back and troubleshoot your security group. So let's take a look at the security group of this machine. I think my public IP has changed, and that's the reason why. Yep, my public IP has changed. That's the reason why it's not able to connect. So let's go ahead and save. And let's now go back and try the same command once more. So this time it's asking to add the fingerprint. Yes. So now you are connected to this machine. Let's elevate our privileges to super user. Let's type ls. We should already have our folder called as student, which we cloned from the GitHub repository. And we do have all of our files over here. So in the last class, in one of the previous sections, when we installed Java and Maven, we got our target directory with our jar file. But right now, what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and modify our code a little bit and generate the jar file for the second time so that it's updated with the latest code. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to source directory. Let's go into the main directory. Let's go into the resources directory, within which we have a file called as application.properties. Let's cat application.properties. So you can see over here, we need to modify the endpoint, which is nothing but we need to replace localhost with the RDS databases endpoint, and also add the password over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let me edit this file using the VI editor. Let me go into insert mode by hitting the I on the keyboard. Let me move my cursor to the localhost point where I'm going to go ahead and remove localhost. Go back to my browser, open up RDS. Let's open up the RDS console. So in the RDS console, When you go to your DB instances, you should be able to see your student DB that you created in the previous lecture. So grab the endpoint of the student DB, go back to your terminal and paste it. So you should be able to see JDBC :MySQL : the entire endpoint :3306, which is the port to connect to the RDS database, and the database name is student. Let's also input our password. So it's in plain text right now, but generally you would have environment variables when you're working for an organization. So that environment variables can be passed during runtime. Okay, but for right now we are keeping it simple. Okay. So write and quit by typing escape:WQ. So once you have modified this file, let's build our jar file again. So let's go back 3 directories where we have the pom.xml. Let's build our jar file once more by typing the command mvn package. So it should go ahead and do an mvn clean, which means it's going to remove all of the files within the target directory. And then it's going to go ahead and build our jar file for the second time. So it's saying build success right now. So it has gone ahead and again built our jar file. Okay, so it should be there within the target directory. Let's take a look at it. So let's go to the target directory. So you can see that we have the jar file. Let's type ls-la to see the date timestamp. So again, you can see over here, July 20th. Last time it was the previous date that I had built the jar file, but now it's showing July 20th, which is today that I'm recording. So now if we run this jar file, technically we should have access to the database, and it should print out the first value within the database, within the table student, which is 1 and Akshay. So let's test it out. So let's run this jar file. The easiest way to run a jar file is to just type java-jar and filename.jar. That's all you need to do. Java-jar filename.jar. Let's hit and enter. Fingers crossed. Let's see if we are able to connect to the database. Okay, brilliant. So it was able to connect to the database. It has started our application on port 9000. And the ID is saying ID is 1, which is student. ID is 1 and the name is Akshay. So it was successfully able to connect to the database. And one more way to test this out is that you can access this via the browser, provided you open up port 9000 on your EC2 instance. Let's try that. Since the application is still running within the EC2 instance, we can go back to our EC2 instance. Let's click on our EC2 instance. Let's go down to security groups and let's open up port 9000 on our security group. And that is the port in which our application is running. And let's open it up only to my IP address. Let's click on save. So now what you can do to test this out is you can grab your public IP of your virtual machine, which is nothing but our local development environment within which our Java application is running. You can paste it in the browser and type the port 9000 and specify /app, which is the context path, /students, which means it's going to go ahead and list all of the students, taking all of the data from the database, which is nothing but our RDS instance. Voila, awesome. So we have ID1, ID2, and ID3 with the respective names. So let's try out /app/student/ID1. Let's see if this endpoint works. Amazing, this endpoint also works. So right now we have done the testing from the EC2 instance by running the application locally within the EC2 instance, which is connected to our database, which is nothing but our RDS instance. So in the next section, what we are going to do is, since we have finished our local testing, the next section, what we are going to do is we are going to build a Docker image out of this application, and we are going to upload our Docker image to Elastic Container Registry, and then run that Docker image as a task definition within the Elastic Container service, which is nothing but a cluster of EC2 instances. And it will be registered to the load balancer. So our end goal in the next section would be probably 1 or 2 lectures down the line, would be to visualize the same output, from the load balancer's endpoint. Okay. So I hope you got the idea as to how we did our local testing. So just to a small recap, we'll keep a checkpoint, just a small recap. So we went ahead and cloned our repository code. Then we went ahead and installed Java and Maven into our local development machine. We built our jar file. using the Maven install command. And then we spawned up our database, which had a database instance, which had a database called a student and a table also called a student, which had three values inserted onto it, which has two columns, ID and name. And then we went into our local development machine where we do have our code, and we modified the application.properties file in order to connect to the database by specifying the DB endpoint as well as the password. And then we built the jar once again. And then we modified our security group in the middle so that we'll be able to establish that network connectivity between the database and the EC2 instance, which is nothing but our local development machine. And then we were able to go ahead and directly run our jar application and view this output onto the EC2 instances, because we are using our EC2 instance as our local development machine. So if we run the jar within our EC2 instance, obviously it should be exposed on that EC2 instance onto a port which is 9000 and a context path of /app. So I hope you do get the idea up till this checkpoint as to what we have done. So since we have done the local testing, next we are going to install Docker and do the testing via Docker and then upload our image to ECR. Okay. So I'll catch you guys in the next section. Thank you for following along. Please do watch the next few lectures also in order to complete the project. Thank you guys and have a great day and stay safe.